Hi guys, Paul here again with an ear for men. I've had a few people asking recently when I was going to get back to doing the camera work for videos rather than these podcasts. And my best guess at this point is going to be about mid-February. For those of you who don't know, I am moving cross-country from Houston to Roanoke. It's quite a process and it'll take some time to get everything sorted out. But I should have my new studio set up right around mid-February, and I'll begin production again of the videos. And with that, I'll go ahead and start with today's talk. I came across a meme recently. You may be familiar with it. It was a text version of a conversation between a man and woman who are discussing their plans to go out to dinner. "Where do you want to eat?" asks the woman. "How about Chinese food?" answers the man. "No," says the woman, "that won't do." "Okay," says the man, "how about Mexican?" "I don't think so," says the woman. "How about seafood?" says the man. "Nope." "Well," says the man, frustrated and resigned, "why don't we just eat where you want?" "Oh, no," says the woman. "I want you to choose." Now, of course, this meme did not materialize itself out of a vacuum, and while it's intended to be funny, and it succeeds, it does reflect a part of the male-female interaction that is all too real in the experience of a lot of men. It's worth taking a closer look because while most men are familiar with this kind of exchange, it is not something we typically talk about or discuss with each other. And before I start, I ought to say that I haven't lost touch with who my audience is. I know there are many men who watch my videos that would just shrug off the conversation and say, "Don't let your dinner plans hinge on a woman's will and you won't have a problem." And of course, they'd be right. Then again, one of the operating principles of this channel is an understanding that most men aren't going to opt for that path. They're going to pair bond with women and will consequently face having to make decisions with them. Thus the reason for today's talk. That said, let's take a closer look at the hypothetical conversation presented in the meme, remembering that, like most popular memes, it closely enough mirrors real life to strike a chord. It rings a familiar bell with more than just a few men. Now, there are a few things that occur to me from the outset. One, it is clear enough that the woman in our conversation is not really interested in where the man wants to eat. She could not care less. So that leaves the question, why insist that he make the choice when all she will do is shoot his choices down? The answer to that seems apparent too. She wants him to instinctively know what she wants. She wants him to pull the information out of thin air and then suggest it as his choice. Granted, it's a bizarre and probably childish approach, but it is hardly uncommon, and the question remains, what does she get out of this scenario? Why play a game or offer what amounts to a shit test by insisting that a man take on the appearance of making a choice when he's not? What is the reward for a man playing the mind-reading game, anticipating a woman's desires, and then suggesting those desires in a way that does not put the onus on her to assert herself or even to admit what it is she wants? This is the strange communication landscape that many men must navigate in their relationship lives. It is easy, common sense even, to write this off to modern women's apparently chronic immaturity, to just conclude that you are dealing with a child who wants a paternal relationship with a man who plays the good father, who anticipates all her desires in the same way a daddy knows his little girl wants ice cream before he asks, who just magically knows how to make her happy and does so without prompting. And if we're going to be frank, none of that is off base. Modern women commonly live a life of dual personalities. They pride themselves on being strong, independent, and adult arbiters of their own destiny, with the ability of slipping into the role of daddy's little princess when only daddy is looking. They count on living in a social environment that indulges them in denial about that duality, and society, in most cases, complies graciously. You see this in most sources of relationship advice, whether it comes from women or men, professionals or lay people. Emphasis is put on men being thoughtful, almost without boundary. There is significant pressure to, shall we say, anticipate what she wants for dinner and suggest it for her. While something different may emerge from time to time, you'll rarely see anyone, from Cosmo writers to licensed therapists, call out the silent expectation of mind reading, of doting paternalism from men to women, their supposed equals. Happy wife, happy life seldom, if ever, gets challenged in the literature or the therapist's office. Again, it's easy to just write all this off to a society operating in denial of its rampant gynocentrism, and I'd be the last person to blame you for it if you did. Still, I want to take this a step further with an idea that may well inject something more meaningful and constructive into the dialogue. Setting aside the quest for understanding the roots and just looking at the realities on the surface, my experience tells me that men and women have basic desires in their relationships that are both complementary and contradictory. In short, women want to be cherished and men want to be admired. I fully expect some may challenge this as grossly oversimplified, and to be honest, it is a reduced, highly distilled model of human interaction. Still, I think it's a useful lens through which we can see the motivators for men and women, especially when they are taken to highly dysfunctional levels. The first thing that strikes me about these two respective desires for men and women is their complementary aspect. To cherish, or respectively to admire, are both elevated positions. They put the man and the woman in a relationship in a position of looking up to the other, and of being looked up to by the other. They both depend on each partner placing a value on the other. In that sense, they would seem to be both natural and healthy objectives. And as a foundational dyad of traditional relationships, they formed the components of the old world social contract. Men cherished women and took care of them. Women admired and respected men for doing so, taking care of them in return. So far, so good. We are not talking about anything remotely unhealthy, immature, or dysfunctional. Indeed, correctly applied, these could easily be the foundational principles governing healthy, loving relationships. If you sense a but, though, there certainly is one. It's the contradictory aspect. Cherishment can be a cruel master. Delivered within reason, there isn't a problem. When the relationship demands cherishment that is bottomless, however, it's a very different story. It becomes consuming and ironically drains the man of that which is precisely his need in the relationship: respect and admiration. A man who tries to satisfy a woman's insatiable appetite for adulation won't be able to maintain respect for himself, nor will she respect him. It's relationship physics 101. Cherishment in exchange for respect is sustainable and probably healthy. Cherishment at the expense of respect is just the opposite. That's the contradiction. And that brings us to the current problem in modern relationships. What I'm talking about here is a fundamentally defunct social contract between men and women. In fact, if I just looked around at the modern relationship landscape, I would be hard-pressed to believe that there was ever a time when women honored men. Thing is, though, part of my youth was spent in a time where I actually saw that happen. I remember when it was considered very bad form for a woman to badmouth their men to others, when hard-working men, those who cherished their wives with labor, were greeted at the end of the day with a hot meal, a clean house, and little else to do, including the fact that they did not have to come home and worry about when the lawyers were going to show up and pull the rug from underneath their feet. Now, it is certainly arguable whether this was worth the trade-off. whether not having to do your own laundry or cook or clean was recompense enough for 10 hours in a coal mine or the highly pressurized environment of corporate life. And it is debatable whether a man's labor was ever a fair trade for enduring women's emotional neediness. Then again, men didn't have the market cornered on dealing with frustrations in relationships that were due to the differences between the sexes. It was always an uneasy, if successful, alliance. I'm not here to argue whether men should or should not accept any particular trade-off with women, especially as I'm sure that different men would give a wide range of answers. I'm simply pointing out that generally speaking, that was the arrangement, and that most men of that generation were satisfied enough with it. Men cherished women by laboring to provide for them. Women admired those efforts enough to do what they needed to do to take care of the men. This arrangement, by the way, often required both men and women to anticipate the needs of the other and move to fulfill those needs without building resentments or maintaining a scorecard. All that is well and good, but the problem is that while women continue to expect men to hold up their end of the social contract, they have defaulted on their end. After all, as it impacted relationships, the only objective of what we used to call women's liberation was to liberate women from their end of that contract. I recall a conversation I had with my girlfriend. She worked well over 20 years for the same man in the financial industry. From my personal eyewitness experience, I can tell you that he took very good care of her on the job. He made sure that she was well rewarded for her work that supported his money-making efforts. She told me that one day she noticed a light was out in his office, so she went and found a light bulb to replace it. One of her younger co-workers, actually a student intern, sneered at her for doing it and questioned why she would do something so menial. It was not said explicitly, but the implication, according to my girlfriend, was that why should she, as a woman, change a man's light bulb? Couldn't he do that for himself? While this was an employment situation, the attitude and implications are the same. We have cultivated a culture where women doing anything for men is frowned upon, unpopular, and considered demeaning. Of course, men doing things for women, guessing where they want to eat being one of them, is still considered good form. Society still laments men and shames them for being unwilling to cooperate. Consequently, women's desire to only recognize one side of the social contract is why we have never really had a men's liberation movement till now, with the advent of MGTOW. In fact, I'll argue that MGTOW is finally the long-awaited men's liberation. Much more than simple bachelorhood, it is a complex and necessary response to women's liberation. And unlike women's liberation, the men have not made it a corrupt political agenda seeking special treatment. They have simply opted to check out, satisfied that liberation between the ears was sufficient to get the job done. And that is great, except that men who engage in relationships with women, which is most of them, will still confront the modern conundrum. Women want to be cherished, but they often want it in the same way that a 4-year-old princess wants a selfless father figure to provide without question or recompense. They not only don't want to respect and admire the men who provide for them, they want to actively disrespect and demean those same men. And that leads us directly back to the meme that started this talk and to the challenge that men who take the relationship plunge will invariably face. Men in relationships are forced to figure out where to draw their lines in the sand, or even if they have the self-respect to draw a line at all. If they cannot or will not make a woman feel cherished or loved in any way, their relationship will falter. In other words, if they don't cherish a woman enough, they'll lose. If they cherish a woman too much, and if it is not reciprocated with respect, they'll lose in a much bigger way. The problem with cherishment, especially as we see the desire for it play out in modern women, is that it has become an insatiable beast. It has become the Audrey 2 from the Little Shop of Horrors, growing when fed, then demanding more after each feeding. It becomes the ironic killer of the man's needs, admiration, and respect. No man with self-respect can perpetually feed another person's need to be cherished. And to be more frank, no woman can really respect or admire a man so selfless that he surrenders his dignity for her childish demands. She may like being lavished with privilege, but she won't ever respect the source. So what I submit to the audience here is that it is the task of every man in a relationship to figure out where his limits are, keeping in mind that if he has no limits, he is even more at risk for personal disaster than if he is rigid and completely unyielding. Fortunately, it's not my job, nor would I want it if offered, to make this decision for anyone. And I know it's a real challenge. How do you reasonably cherish someone? What sort of cherishment does a reasonable woman expect? Is there even such a thing as reasonable cherishment? I don't even have the answer to that, but I suggest, one way or the other, that any man in a relationship is going to have to find his answers to these questions, whether he likes it or not. The only possible options to avoid it are 1, no relationship, which is of course perfectly reasonable, or 2, the path of cherishing with total abandon, which of course is not reasonable at all and will never earn a man the admiration and respect that a man needs. Perhaps, like many other things, the journey is more important than the destination. The quest is more important than the actual answer. But what I do know for sure is that it's not up to me. I won't pay the price for any man's decisions, but you can be rest assured that any man making the wrong decision with almost any woman is going to pay the price.